For anyone who's ever traipsed through a Renaissance festival while chomping on a turkey leg and quaffing overpriced ale, Celtic culture is typically associated with Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. However, the Celts originated primarily from Central Europe before eventually rampaging their way into other regions during the Iron and Medieval Ages. Although Celtic people are not a distinct racial or genetic group, they emerged as a multitude of disparate clans sharing a variety of common rituals, language, and customs, especially in the art of warfare. In short, the Romans were terrified of them. Hollywood would later immortalize them. But alas, separating fact from fiction can be more challenging than a middle-aged actor attempting his own stunts or a convincing Scottish accent, for that matter. Number 10. An enduring and complicated legacy. The Greeks called them the Keltoi, which is most likely how these diverse tribes came to be known as Celts. Other names include Galatians, Wales, Picts, and Gauls. But to the haughty Romans, they were disparagingly labeled as barbarians with exaggerated claims of charging into battle, inebriated, without any clothes. But to be fair, drunk and naked brawling remains a time-honored tradition and is usually the highlight of most episodes of Cops. Unfortunately, the Celts spent considerably more time feuding and fighting than penning their memoirs and left behind virtually no written records. Nonetheless, archaeological evidence provides at least a partial glimpse into their martial prowess and unabashed zeal for bloodshed. It's also worth noting that the Roman Empire never occupied Ireland, allowing the Celtic culture to survive longer on the Emerald Isle than anywhere else. Number 9. Headhunting. In the annals of military history, the practice of collecting body parts as war trophies is not altogether uncommon. The Celts, however, raised it to another level. Based on their pagan, druidic spiritual views, they believed the soul lived inside a person's head and would decapitate enemies as a way of harvesting power and instilling fear in future victims. Heads of the vanquished often adorned Celtic spears and dangled from the saddles of horsemen and chariots like fuzzy dice on a tricked-out hot rod. Additionally, skulls were frequently used as a favored decorative motif in several art forms. The Roman historian Diodorus describes another element of the Celts' macabre hobby. He states, "In exactly the same way as hunters do with their skulls of the animals they have slain, they preserved the heads of their most high-ranking victims in cedar oil, keeping them carefully in wooden boxes." Number 8. Style matters. The oft-quoted creed, "live fast, die young, and leave behind a good-looking corpse," could have easily been applied to the ancient Celts. So also would dress to kill. A love of decoration, they wear ornaments of gold, torques on their necks, and bracelets on their arms and waists, while people of high rank wear dyed garments besprinkled with gold. Celtic figures made an equally bold statement with their coiffures, using lime water as a means to both lighten and spike their hair, creating a stylish look that would make Billy Idol a bit jealous. And in parts of Britannia, the Picts painted their bodies with woad, a flowering plant that produces a dark blue dye. Pict means painted people in Latin, by the way. Better hair, flashier bling, and tribal ink are usually enough to win most battles, but the Gauls also benefited from being more muscular and several inches taller than their rivals. So much for the adage, you can't have it all. Number 7. Hot Wheels. The effective use of chariots played an integral role in Celtic warfare. Although the Egyptians are credited with introducing horse-drawn carriages into battle, the Celts made vast improvements in the overall design and battlefield tactics. Each chariot typically relied on a pair of horses and was manned by a driver and a soldier. After engaging the enemy, the warrior either launched the javelins or exited the vehicle to fight as an infantryman. The skilled driver could then circle back later to retrieve the wounded or grab any available spoils of war. In Book 5 of the Gallic Wars, Julius Caesar heaps praise on the expertise he witnessed, stating, "In chariot fighting, the Britons begin by driving all over the field, hurling javelins, and generally the terror inspired by the horses and the noise of the wheels are sufficient to throw their opponents' ranks into disorder. By daily training and practice, they attained such proficiency that even on a steep incline, they are able to control the chariots at full gallop and to check and turn them in a moment." Number 6. Weapons of mass production. Not surprisingly, the preponderance of Celtic tribes produced a vast array of weapons reflective of their warring culture. The Gauls armed themselves with long two-handed axes and hammers. Picts were known to use light crossbows in combat, and Iberians from modern-day Spain utilized a short double-sided sword designed for stabbing in close quarters. A variety of long and short spears included javelins made from an ash wood pole measuring 6.5 feet in length and fitted with a large leaf-shaped spearhead. Young warriors, or those unable to handle heavier implements, used slings to hurl smooth, current-worn stones taken out of rivers. The arrival of the Iron Age around 1200 BC led to more advanced types of weapons and killing efficiency. Later, the widespread production of steel not only created superior swords and spear tips compared to earlier bronze equivalents, but also weapons capable of piercing body armor and shields. Number 5. Fashion first. The Celts often combined artistic flair and advanced metallurgy to create impressive defensive armor. Archaeologists have revealed spectacular discoveries such as the Battersea shield and ornate helmets, some of which feature hinged wings that could actually flap. But their invention of chainmail, it remains their most significant and iconic contribution to warfare, as well as becoming a fan favorite of LARP enthusiasts everywhere. The etymology of chainmail comes from the French word of mail, which is derived from the Latin macula, meaning mesh of a net. The construction involves the interlinking of iron or steel rings, the ends of which were either welded or riveted to form a flexible garment such as a shirt or a hood. Although not infallible against pointed swords or spears, chainmail provided the earliest form of metal-constructed body armor that was worn in combat. The Romans later adopted a form of chainmail called lorica hamata as the standard protection of its infantry legionaries. Chainmail is still used in various industries today, such as gloves to protect the hands of butchers and full suits worn by shark divers. Number 4. Greetings from Rome. Unlike the delightful 1953 rom-com romp Roman Holiday starring Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn, the Celtic version in 390 BC resembled more of a blood-spattered horror flick that left the fabled Eternal City in total ruin. A detailed account by Livy describes the dramatic raid in which the invaders descended so quickly that Rome was thunderstruck by the swiftness at which they moved. Although modern-day historians debate the actual number of Celts involved, most likely to be around 12,000, and the actual date, some say 387 BC, the Battle of Allia ultimately determines the Romans' shocking demise. The majority of the fighting took place at the confluence of the rivers Tiber and Allia, roughly 10 miles north of Rome. Led by Brennus, a chieftain from Cisalpine Gaul, his forces easily dispatched the overmatched defenders en route to sacking the storied capital. Roman leaders attempted to bribe the victors by offering 1,000 pounds of gold in exchange for their freedom. The dispute over the weights used to measure the loot the Gauls had brought their own resulted in Brennus throwing down his sword onto the scales and uttering the famous decree Vae Victis, or woe to the conquered. In other words, we won, you lost, pay up. Number 3. Queen Boudica. The Celts, like most ancient civilizations, functioned primarily as a patriarchal, male-dominated society. Celtic women, however, possessed far more freedoms and rights than their Greek and Roman counterparts. They were also allowed to train and fight as soldiers, including the legendary Boudica, who led a successful revolt against the Romans in AD 61. Following the death of her husband, King Prasutagus, Boudica presided over the Iceni in eastern Britannia. Prasutagus had previously established diplomacy with the Romans and struck an agreement, naming his 2 teenage daughters as heirs, with Boudicca serving as regent until they became of age. But the Romans, they quickly reneged on the deal, and after raping the daughters, the provincial leaders had Boudicca publicly flogged out of contempt for the female ruler. This was a bit of a mistake. The warrior queen responded by rallying the Iceni and united other tribes whose rage against the Romans had reached a tipping point. Inspired by the warrior queen, the Celts destroyed the Roman administrative town of Londinium, modern-day London, and sacked 2 other towns before finally succumbing to the weight of the greatest empire that the world had ever known. As a final act of defiance, Boudica poisoned herself and thus forever cemented her well-deserved immortality. Hail to the queen. Number 2. Vercingetorix. In much the same way that Boudica is revered in Great Britain, the Gaelic warrior Vercingetorix equally shines as the first national hero of France. He is best remembered for his cunning military expertise and defending his homeland, and as the man who nearly defeated Julius Caesar. Vercingetorix became king and chieftain of the Arverni during the Gallic Wars in 52 BC. Up until then, Caesar had been able to exploit divisive factions that stymied the fiercely independent tribes within the region. That soon changed with the arrival of an an exceptional Celtic leader whose name roughly translates to the greatest king of warriors. Described by ancient historians as tall, handsome, and charismatic, Vercingetorix immediately established an alliance with other regional groups. He led the combined forces, utilizing guerrilla warfare tactics and a scorched earth policy to rebel against a common and reviled enemy. At the Battle of Gergovia, the Gauls triumphed, forcing Caesar's mighty legions to retreat. Vercingetorix followed up his victory by attacking a Roman-held fortress at the Battle of Alesia. There, Caesar mustered all of his own charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent to thwart the Celts' offensive. In an effort to spare his soldiers from annihilation, Vercingetorix surrendered himself to Caesar, who had him imprisoned and eventually executed in 46 BC. 2 years later, Caesar met a similar fate, providing the reminder: beware the Ides of March. Number 1. Heroes for hire. The import of battle-hardened mercenaries can be found throughout history, ranging from the Apaches in the American Southwest to the samurai in feudal Japan. And for over 500 years in Europe, the Celts routinely served in foreign armies in need of soldiers of fortune. The presents included campaigns with Pyrrhus in his victories against the Romans at Heraclea and Asculum. Ptolemy II feared his band of 4,000 Gauls might eventually conquer Egypt for themselves and had them marooned on a deserted island in the Nile. Then there's the famed Carthaginian general Hannibal, who employed large numbers during the Second Punic War. At times, however, Celtic fervor served as a liability. In Gaul, Caesar wrote, "There are factions not only in every state and every village and district, but practically in every individual household as well." Flash forward to the 21st century, and the same combative spirit is still very much alive in places like Dublin and Belfast, where gang warfare continuously rages in turf wars between feuding clans. Similarly, in Glasgow, old firm rivals Rangers and Celtic maintain this blood-spilling spectacle every season to the delight of frenzied crowds. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe. We've got brand new videos just like this every day of the week. For more from me, why not subscribe to my other channel? It's called Biographics. I'm going to link to that below. And as always, thank you for watching.